Okay, so just following on from the first video, so we're just talking about understanding the different colours of papers that are used and what are they, what's the purpose of them, and then looking at which we talked about advocacy and different forms of advocacy, and we need to just make sure that you understand what are those different roles. So I've talked about three different pieces of legislation and three different advocacy roles. So are you able to remember those during the exam? Also think about the United Nations and the rights of the child, and what was the kind of general principle of this this convention. So thinking about do you know what those general principles are, and do you know what the purpose of that about the child's voice being heard. Then we talked about other pieces of legislation. So we talked about things like the Data Protection Act, Freedom of Information Act, and just having a general understanding of what those pieces of legislation can do. And in particular, thinking about what, in terms of that information and getting access to that information, how would somebody go about doing that? Just a general kind of understanding of that area. And then the second piece of the exam is around looking at one piece of legislation and thinking about social pedagogical perspective, or a social pedagogical concept in relation to that piece of legislation. So we've got all the different sessions that you've looked at. So we've looked at Mental Health Act, the Mental Capacity Act, the Care Act, the Children Act, the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act. You can choose whatever you want to, and within those pieces of legislation, what I want you to do is to consider how social pedagogy is relevant there, and also how you might interpret and implement and apply that legislation from a social pedagogical perspective. So what would the things be important to you? And at each session I've tried to make those connections for you to start to give you some time to think about that. So thinking about the principles behind the Act are often a really good way to start, and to think about how, you know, the principles are set there, but depending, it takes more than just the rules to tell you how to act. It's also about, are we able to adopt that social pedagogy within our approach? What might be some of the barriers in doing that, and how do we overcome them? So you might want to think of some examples from your own work that you want to bring forward, and that would be fine to do it. But it is giving you a choice of which of those pieces of legislation are you connecting to more, do you feel more confident about, and so you'd be able to prepare some notes to bring with you, and so in the exam you can have something to write about. And then finally, so that's the exam. They've got the 10 multiple choice questions, and then you've got this part B, which is about the piece of legislation and the social pedagogical concept. In terms of the assignment after that will come in after this date, is that you will have two parts to that. One is writing a letter to a young person who's in foster care, who doesn't want to have any contact from the local authority, and is sort of refusing to meet people. And your role is to act from an independent sector, is trying to give him some support in explaining why that is necessary. And so obviously you'll need to have a little bit of understanding about why the local authority wants to be involved, has to be involved, but you're also thinking more widely about how are you going to convey that message. This young person may not necessarily want the detail of the sections, but how are you going to convey why the local authority needs to still be involved? So it's thinking about that approach and how you could support somebody. And then the second part is around the advocacy session, and is about providing that information in an accessible form within a medical centre, for example. So understanding what those three different types of advocacy are, but also again thinking it's not about the detail of the sections in this, because as a member of the public, that's not what you're going to connect to. But can you use your knowledge and understanding of the law to then kind of interpret that within in an easy read way, so that people would have at least some knowledge about the different forms of advocacy and how they might go about seeing if they were eligible for them. So I've put an example on Blackboard as well from Voiceability about easy read material, so you'll be able to have a look at that. But that's just to give you an idea, and you can really use whatever format that you want. So, you know, I've gone through the exam now. There is absolutely no surprises that are coming up on the exam that I haven't talked about. I'm not expecting you to learn every aspect of every session that we've been through. I know that it's a lot of information. That's why I've tried to kind of use the first video to help you focus on some of those key areas for the 10 multiple choice. You've got some time, and you know what that SEAM part of the paper is, and you'll be able to have access to that fully quite soon. So you should be able to do some preparation, and then in terms of the assignment, you've got those materials that you would be able to use. So hopefully you're going to feel as confident as you can do for the exam, and you won't struggle with answering those questions, I'm sure. So maybe just keep playing through this video, and I'm sorry that means you've got to just keep listening to and watching me on this video a couple of times. But if you can go through each point that I did on the 10 multiple choice questions and feel a bit of confidence, I know what she's talking about, then you will be absolutely fine. Okay, well, good luck with your revision, and if you've got any questions, then feel free to email me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.